Shalom. I want to talk about, is the Passover night a vigil or a night of watches? And this idea comes from a passage in the book of Exodus, chapter 12, verse 42, and it reads like this: It is a night to be much observed unto Jehovah for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of Jehovah to be observed of all the children of Israel in their generations. And just to first clarify, it seems as though most people understand that this is referring to the night of the Passover, that we keep as the Passover. Now, some in different Christian traditions, they'll treat this as referring to the night that follows on after the night of the Passover. And the reason why is because it follows on after a passage that has just dealt with Israel coming out of Egypt, the description of them then leaving from Ramses to Sukkot, baking unleavened bread, and then if you go from verse 41 into verse 42, it seems as though it follows on from at that point there is a night to observe. However, we can be fairly certain that this is referring to the night of the Passover, in that from verse 41 through down to verse 50, we suddenly get all these rites concerning the Passover lamb. And we know that the night is very much linked to that sacrifice. And so we're pretty certain that this is a description of the night of the Passover. But just so you understand where some church traditions, they treat it as being the night after, that's why they do that. However, it would seem more consistent to just knowing that the night of all nights in our calendar is that of the Pesach. So why this passage leading people to this idea, to get this idea of vigil? Well, it's because this phrase used here, much observed, is there's a Hebrew word used here, and it's only used once in this whole in the whole of the Tanakh, and it's used on this one occasion, and it is the word shemur. In fact, in Exodus 12, it's actually in the plural, shemurim. And here we get the idea of the translators, well, they say an idea of watching or a vigil. And so often in scripture we'll say you shall watch, or you shall guard the commandments, or you shall keep them. And there's this idea of shema, to watch over, guard, keep. Shemur is related, but however there is this understanding that, well, the uniqueness of its use may be alluding to a watch, like a watch in the night. And so you get different translations around this verse. Now we see this in this idea of a shemur being used for a watch, or like the literal kind of watching out and being vigilant. I've got it here from the Hebrew Matthew. Some of you may know, I think it's George Howard. He did a translation of the Hebrew Matthew. And yeah, you know the passage well. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 43. I'll start from verse 42. Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched, and not allowed his house to be broken into. And so here in the Hebrew Matthew, you'll see I've surrounded in red. We see the word there, shemur, being used. This idea of to a kind of a literal watch, a literal being vigilant and watching and staying up and being vigilant through the night. So the King James has this idea of the plurality of watching, but more in a kind of like guarding the commandments, shall be much observed. But there are other translations that are going, well, maybe it is a night of watches, of being vigilant, of staying up. So the NIV interprets this way. It does that same passage, Exodus 12:42. because the Lord kept vigil that night to bring them out of Egypt. On this night, all the Israelites are to keep vigil to honor the Lord for the generations to come. So it actually reads quite nicely, and it's a very tempting thing that as he kept watch, he watched over the houses of Israel. So there's this annual, in remembrance, Israel is to keep watch. And so that's one of the interpretations here. Then, this is obviously tempting for believers in Yeshua, because we can see a bit of a pattern here. So we know on what appears to be day 13, he said to his disciples, "Go and make ready the Pesach," and I don't want to get into dating, and different people see it differently. But we get this sense that the Last Supper was also the last Passover. He describes it as that he would eat the Passover with his disciples, and they went to found this room where he could do that. And he describes himself as eating that night the Passover with his disciples. And what's interesting is we know it was at night where that ended up being one where they seemed to stay up, and they were going through the night. And we get the description of being vigilant and keeping watch. That comes through the different Gospels. Here I've got Matthew 26, 40 and 41. You remember when he's in Gethsemane and he gets disappointed where he had left some to Shimur to watch, and he gets back and they're all asleep. And he said, what, could you not just watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray that you enter not into temptation. And the spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. And so on that night, we definitely get the sense of a long night. They're staying up, and so it's tempting to see that maybe Yeshua did see the night of the Passover as being one of keeping watch. And so this is why it's an interesting idea to interpret Shimurim as a night of watches. The other thing that definitely makes the kind of staying up into the evening, into the night, from evening into night, an element of keeping Passover, and this is with those who are leaning more and more towards a Karaite or Samaritan interpretation of when the Pesach was to be slaughtered. And the phrase used in Exodus 12 verse 6, I believe, is that it was to be slaughtered Bein Ha'arbayim, between the evenings. And in Orthodox Judaism, they understand this as being in the afternoon. Whereas Karaites and Samaritans, they believe, no, it points more toward the time of twilight. And, we get this, the reason why, and most of the translators, by the way, they will translate it as twilight. I think it's only the Orthodox Jewish Bible that will translate it as in the afternoon. And the reasons for this is the uniqueness of this phrase. Bein ha'arbayim is a very specified, I think it's only used 5 times in all the Tanakh, I think twice with the Pesach, and and in a few other places. But here we have, the one place is with the description of when to light the lamps in the tabernacle, in Exodus chapter 30, where, you don't, you light the lamps at night time, it's too late, it's already dark, and in the afternoon there's no point. So the idea of between sunset and nightfall, or what's known as dusk, makes a lot of sense. And so that's what leads translators to believe this was an old Hebrew idiom or phrase used to denote twilight. Another place where it's uniquely used is in Exodus 16, when Israel was to get meat, and the description is of the quail settling, and some of the older translations will have even, which was understood as at after sunset, but more and more will have twilight there, and that also makes sense in terms of if you know pheasants and chickens and that this is when they roost. They roost typically after sunset, just before it's getting dark. And so, yeah, this is making some view that the twilight idea of slaughtering might be the correct timing. Another one is Exodus 29, verse 39. Here's where it's a description of the evening sacrifice. And just so you know, the word here, often translated as even here. It's not erev, which is evening. Typically, we understand erev is translated as evening sacrifice. The evening sacrifice, the erev sacrifice, is here described also as the between the evening sacrifice. So again, pointing to after sunset. And so a lot of the Samaritans, they wait for the sun to have set, and that's only when they start slaughtering. And just so that some may wonder, well, what about maybe the timing with Yeshua? There could be, by the way, in Genesis chapter 15, another sacrifice in the afternoon that may better link up with the timing of when Yeshua died and why. I don't want to go into that. But what's this got to do with the vigil? Well, the ladies are most probably figuring this one out and are like, no, this is terrible. If we only kill and sacrifice the animal at sunset, well, we still got to cook it. And if anyone knows anything about a roast, it takes a lot of time. Apparently, the Samaritans only start eating at about midnight. And so this is also what leads to the night is kind of, if you believe in this in the slaughtering side, there's of twilight. It definitely would lend itself to it's going to be quite a night's ritual and rite to keep. It's going to take time to just get to the meal. Now, some point out that, well, the phrase in Exodus 12 verse 5, a lamb of the first year, lambs, youngins, it's pointing towards newborns, that kind of use. And of the first year, although there are translations that say 1 year old, in Hebrew understanding, that when you're born, you're in your first year, and that this could actually be referring to young, that a month before Pesach, that's the lambing season, and you could eat young lambs, and so the how long to cook may not be as much. However, there's also the description of you do not eat. You eat of the head, the legs, and the innards. All right. This is, if you go to the book of Leviticus, you see this typical of offerings, where this didn't include the skin, nor the digestive tract, but there was a lot. There was a lot to be eaten. There's a lot to be eaten, and so this might also lead to a night. It certainly does with Samaritans, and I would imagine for Karaites if they are doing quite a bit of lamb. However they are keeping it, that it takes a bit of time if you only start cooking it after sunset. And so, yeah, and just I put this here. This is from Sepharim. It's like a contemporary Jewish translation online, because I wanted to also just look at different versions of coming from the Hebrew. And yeah, even with the Hebrew here, they translate Exodus 12, verse 42, they themselves. So it's not just, I know people say NIV, the nearly inspired version. Well, no, there are others in this contemporary Torah. They are themselves translating it. This was for Yehovah, a night of vigil to bring them out of the land of Egypt. That same night as Yehovah's, one of vigil for all the children of Israel throughout the ages. So, because, yeah, so it's good to just see this as coming also from the Jewish side of the family, because there is a Catholic Vigil. So some might think the NIV is trying to sneak this idea in, but the Catholics actually, before they do the Pascha, which for some reason they now say represents the resurrection and is connected with Easter. But anyway, the night before they actually do a vigil themselves. But it's good to see, no, this idea actually does come from it comes from the text, and it can certainly be a way of translating the text in a fair way, in a reasonable way. And there are different people, different translators who are coming to this conclusion. So, yeah, just to wrap this up, practically, if you wanted to do this, the night of the Passover as a vigil, I found a real blessing to view it in this way, and there's some nice things that you can do if you're reading it this way, and that is let your kids stay up late. They love this. It's the one night where we say you can stay up as late as you want, and we encourage them to stay up and keep watch, as it were, and try and get them to stay up until midnight. And we've got some things that they watch, like Prince of Egypt. If you want something really long to help with the hours, you can try the Ten Commandments, and certainly some passion movies and things about Yeshua's crucifixion. There's lots that can really make the evening very meaningful, and can help with just the significance of the night. Also, here you can choose to, with different people, and maybe those who share the meal with you, to have a moment of contemplative meditation and reading the Word and going through certain passages that deal with atonement and protection, and how God has watched over us, and He's preserved us, and He is our protection offering, and saves us. It can be a really beautiful time for prayer and intercession. And then obviously eating as well. There's varying views on to what degree we should do it according to the scriptures concerning the sacrifice, just because there is no temple, and to what degree we do it in memorial. What we do get with the rite is that certainly by the morning the meat was to be finished, and I think in keeping with that, it might be a good thing as well to try and eat of all the lamb, and before morning, you can do that. Stay up, eat. That's another thing. And then also, this could be an idea for your guests that come. You could make it a night's vigil, and say, well, if you're going to come, stay for the whole night, and we're going to make a night of this, and it could really be an enjoyable thing. For some, you could actually let some sleep, and certain people take the different watches. I'll take midnight till 3. I'll take 3 till 6, and divide it up as well. But everything just in honor and in memory of His protection of us. So, this is a very quick little video, but just to answer the question, is the night of the Passover Vigil? There's a case to be made for it, and certainly I think it could be a beautiful thing to add. And just so you understand where people are coming from with this, it's got to do with Exodus chapter 12 and verse 42, and some translations you won't see it, but the underlying word there is shumarim, and it certainly can point towards this idea of keeping watch and staying up and honoring the night with watches. So I hope this little teaching might be a blessing to you, and maybe you can use it and add traditions to your family that can make the night even more significant. Shalom.